1st of September, the German Wehrmacht invades Poland. On this day, Hitler and his criminal regime initiate a war, which will cost millions of people their lives in the most brutal and cruel way. The lust for power and megalomania of Adolf Hitler and his accomplices plunged Germany and the world into the abyss. 6 years full of blood, tears, death, and suffering.
Wir werden ihre Städte ausradieren!
The path to disaster is paved with racism, hatred, human contempt, and fatal misjudgments. Fueled by blind enthusiasm of Germans for their Führer and his propaganda. Battles, war crimes, and mass murders cost over 70 million lives. In May of 1945, Germany's surrender, but with the American atomic bomb, the world now faces a brand new threat. Berlin, May the 1st. National Socialist factories are marked with the so-called Golden Flag of Honor. 6 years after Adolf Hitler and the National Socialists took power, the society seems to have completely lost its balance and stability.
The National Socialism as a total ideology aims to penetrate every aspect of life, of the population, to thoroughly control it, and this is evident in the way that almost everything, the entire life, is meticulously organized into Nazi organizational structures.
In the new Reich Chancellery on Wilhelmstrasse in the city center, people often search for the leader in vain these months. Adolf Hitler spends much of this summer at his second government seat on the Obersalzberg mountain. Here, away from the public eye, the dictator is crafting plans for continental domination with his closest allies.
Nazism defines itself as a battle to amend the Treaty of Versailles and to bring back the grandeur of the German nation, but within the frameworks of racial purity and territorial expansion. These are essentially the two main slogans, living space in the East and the idea of Aryan racial superiority. Hitler laid this foundation in Mein Kampf, asserting that the racially superior people ultimately have the right to dominate the less superior and thus less culturally productive peoples. And this is particularly directed towards Eastern Europe, specifically the Soviet Union.
It is still far too early for this matter. The Third Reich should only continue to grow elsewhere. After Austria and the defeat of Czechoslovakia, Poland becomes the main focus of the dictator.
Originally, Hitler envisioned Poland as his junior ally for a military conflict against the Soviet Union. Therefore, in the early 1930s, he also signed a non-aggression pact with Poland. However, it soon became evident that Poland wanted to pursue its own policy and did not wish to be Hitler's junior partner. So Hitler terminates the non-aggression pact with Poland and demands that Danzig be annexed to the German Reich immediately.
The city has a moving German and Polish history. Unlike East Prussia, in the framework of the Treaty of Versailles, after the First World War, Danzig is separated from the German Reich. The People's Republic takes over administration. Many of the majority German inhabitants do not want to lose it, just as little as the National Socialists, who skillfully use the port city for their purposes.
This played incredibly into their hands, because they could always argue, well, you see, but there are 99% Germans, so why can't they live in the German Reich? So it was essentially a path to an empty goal, and the Nazi propaganda wonderfully seized it and then converted it.
Propaganda Minister Joseph Goebbels travels to the old Hanseatic city frequently and continues to inflame the German-Polish conflict under the cheers of the populace.
Auch diese Stadt mit ihren Menschen gehört zu diesem Volkstum. Sie ist Deutsch und bleibt Deutsch.
Goebbels knows that the war against Poland has long been a settled issue. His appearances in Danzig are part of a prearranged scheme. Already in May of that same year, Hitler had informed the Wehrmacht commanders that he was determined to attack Poland at the first chance he got. As Rudolf Schmund, chief adjutant of the dictator, stated, the Führer gives the order to prepare the attack in due time. In public, however, the regime emphasizes its desire for peace and portrays Poland as the aggressor. In newspapers and weeklies, attacks on the German minority in neighboring countries are shown to be exaggerated.
Während die Bevölkerung Danzigs ruhig und vertrauensvoll die Heimkehr ins Reich erwartet, sind die Volksdeutschen innerhalb der polnischen Grenzen wildestem Terror ausgesetzt. Viele Tausende flüchteten vor den Gewalttätigkeiten der Polen in den Schutz des Reiches und fanden vorläufig in Sammellagern Aufnahme.
The conflict between the two states is intensifying. 2 years earlier, Poland had initiated a modernization program for its army. Now, the military demonstrates its public strength before the eyes of Commander-in-Chief Marshal Reid-Schmigwy, showing their power. Nazi propaganda interprets the parade as a sign of Polish expansionist ambitions.
Reid-Schmigwy lässt seine Heerscharen paradieren. Man träumt von einem größeren Polen. Der politische Größenwahn der Epigonen Pilsudskis ist ohne Maß.
The German Reich conducts maneuvers at its eastern borders. The Panzer Regiment 6, a unit of the newly formed 3rd Panzer Division, also takes part. On August 20th, 1939, the men retreat eastward. One officer has a camera and films the mission.
In the summer of 1939, it was already clear that the war will soon break out, that Hitler desires the war to start. And that's why he is already deploying his troops for maneuvers at the eastern border of Germany. There, the soldiers can better adapt to the respective circumstances and can also receive the final touches of their training there.
The Panzer Regiment 6 lands in Ratzeburg, near Stettin, positioning strategically for an attack on Poland. But it is not yet the time, because Hitler has a problem. He does not know how his archenemy, the Soviet Union, will behave in the event of a German attack. Stalin could ally with Poland and the Western powers against Germany. On August 23rd, Reich Foreign Minister Joachim von Ribbentrop flies in Hitler's personal plane to Moscow. Here, Ribbentrop and his Soviet official colleague Molotov sign a non-aggression agreement. The German public is astonished. Joseph Stalin is pleased with the successful coup.
The Hitler-Stalin Pact has a secret addendum, which is actually the interesting part, outlining spheres of influence in the event of action against Poland. So, roughly speaking, Germany gets the western part and the Soviet Union the eastern part of Poland, especially East Galicia.
The pact clears Hitler's path to start the war. In the Reich, signs of the upcoming arms race are increasing. A clear indication is the issue of food cards to the people, as here in Hessian Korbach. Some goods, like fats, had already been rationed by the regime. Now there are broad restrictions on food. The older generation still remembers the hunger from the time of the First World War. Throughout the country, people are now preparing for a new shortage of food. The weekly show displays pictures of men who have been drafted into the military. Enthusiasm about the upcoming war, as felt by soldiers in the year of the war, is often in vain in this late summer.
The German intelligence services note that there is a very depressed mood among the German population. People know what it means to wage a major war against the Western powers, against Britain, against France. They know that death, suffering, and deprivation are coming their way.
Unrequited mood in the country lets the German Reich flex its muscles. Strong alliances of the naval forces cross paths in the Baltic Sea waters. After losing a large portion of the High Sea Fleet post-World War I, Germany has been significantly re-equipped since the mid-30s. The SMS Schleswig-Holstein is also an integral part of the naval fleet. On August the 25th, it arrives for a visit to the port of Danzig. A propaganda film shows the ship's reception in the city.
Jubelnd empfängt die alte Hansestadt das Schulschiff Schleswig-Holstein, das ihr den Gruß der Kriegsmarine entbietet.
Afternoon of the same day, Hitler orders the attack on Poland for the next day. But shortly after, the conclusion of a British-Polish alliance pact is publicly announced. The Italian dictator Mussolini explains that his nation is not yet prepared to engage in war with the German Reich. In the evening, the Führer repeats the war order. Diplomats strive to preserve peace in the following days. Among them is the British ambassador in Berlin, Neville Henderson. It appears that Hitler is half-hearted about some mediation attempts, but his decision remains firm. The war casts its ominous shadows everywhere. France, which is allied with Poland, mobilizes at the end of August of the year. Approximately 90 divisions are available for the French forces. Even in London, despite diplomatic efforts, they often agree on the conflict with Germany. The British-Polish Alliance Pact is supposed to come into force if one of the two nations is attacked. Hitler is seeking a method to portray Poland as the provocateur. He will provide a reason for the war resolution, the dictator continues. Regardless of whether it is credible, the victor will not be questioned later about whether he has told the truth or not.
Hitler orders fake attacks by Poles on the German Reich, staging them. Most famously known is the alleged Polish attack on the Gliwice radio station. In reality, it is SS men in Polish uniforms.
On the evening of August 31st, the SS men strike. They disguise themselves and attack the transmitter on Tarnowica Street in Gliwice. The men read out a communique from alleged insurgents. To enhance the credibility of the scene, the command leaves the corpse of Franz Honiak behind. He was kidnapped and murdered the previous day. The staging lasts only a few minutes, but it provides Hitler with the pretext for the attack order. More than 45 German divisions are prepared for the assault on Poland, including the men of the 6th Panzer Regiment. On August the 31st, they move into their assault positions, getting ready for the attack. As part of the Army Group North, they are awaiting their mission orders. In the port of Danzig, the Schleswig-Holstein remains, having been stationed here a few days earlier. It is meant to play a special role in the attack on Poland. At 4:45 in the morning, it's clear.
Das Linienschiff Schleswig-Holstein wird in wenigen Sekunden den Feuerkampf auf die Westerplatte eröffnen.
On the Westerplatte peninsula are Polish ammunition depots, now being shelled from the seaside. The Second World War has started, and in Germany, people listen to the live radio commentary.
Wir sind etwa 200 Meter von der Schleswig-Holstein weg und ungefähr 1 Kilometer von der Westerplatte. Jetzt wird ein gelber Einschlag hoch aufgefallen. Das Einschlagen der schweren Granaten von der Schleswig-Holstein. Jetzt wieder ein Einschlag. Wieder die schweren Geschosse von der Schleswig-Holstein. Der Feuerkampf ist eröffnet. Die deutschen Waffen sprechen jetzt vor Danzig.
A few minutes before, the German Air Force bombarded the Polish city of Wieluń, east of Breslau, without any warning. In several waves of attack, the city's core is reduced to rubble and ashes. Over 1,000 people perish in the demonstration of German assault bombers. Also in the fight for Danzig a bit later, it is attacked from the air.
Treffer auf Westerplatte!
While the Navy and Air Force attack, the German army advances simultaneously. A conflict involving over 1.5 million soldiers and more than 3,000 tanks literally bites into Poland.
By September of 1939, Poland found itself in a very disadvantageous geographic position. It had already been surrounded on 3 different sides, from East Prussia, from Silesia, and from Slovakia, where German forces were stationed.
A few hours later, Hitler addresses the German people and announces the outbreak of the so-called defensive war.
Polen hat heute Nacht zum ersten Mal auf unserem eigenen Territorium auch mit bereits regulären Soldaten geschossen. Seit 5:45 Uhr wird jetzt zurückgeschossen.
In Danzig, the war raged on this 1st of September in the city center. Since the early hours of the morning, Polish defenders have hidden in Post Office number 1. In anticipation of a German attack, a weapon depot had been set up here before. Several attempts by the attackers to take over the building fail initially. In the late afternoon, German pioneers blow a hole in the facade. Later, they pump gasoline into the cellar and set it on fire. As the situation for the defenders becomes more and more hopeless, they surrender and leave the post. Some of the men are immediately shot, most others later executed. The war shows its brutal face very early.
The Wehrmacht soldiers did not need to be convinced of the war against Poland. The German perception of Poland was so negative. During the interwar period, due to the consequences of the First World War, the status of the city of Danzig, and so on, that people were opposed to the war, opposed to a large-scale war, opposed to a conflict with Great Britain, with France, and so on. But when it came to Poland, that people would also take up arms in that case, that was something accepted.
Already on the evening of the 1st of September, no more than 24 hours after the outbreak of the fighting, Danzig is declared German again. While the fighting continues on the Western Plateau, the Wehrmacht moves into the city under the cheer of the population. In Berlin, on this day, Hitler steps in front of the equalized Reichstag and defends the military process and actions. Great Britain and France issued an ultimatum to the German Reich to withdraw its troops from Poland. But the Führer does not think about fulfilling the demand. On the 3rd of September, the two powers declare war on the German Reich.
Hitler
was shocked because he had not really expected that especially Britain would adhere to these alliance obligations. It was always his dream, and one can actually say until 1945, his dream with the truly great world power, which he accepted, to go hand in hand with the British Empire, to establish a greater Germanic Reich, a greater German Reich, and then rule the world together.
Dann die Welt zu beherrschen.
From Guernsey Island in the Channel, British expeditionary forces are sent to France. Like in World War I, the troops are to support the Allied French in an expected Wehrmacht attack. A two-front war threatens Germany. Besides Poland in the east, France is now an enemy in the west. This front is still quiet.
Britain and France do not launch attacks. Why don't they attack? They actually have a great superiority. Most German troops are in the east, in Poland. However, the French military doctrine primarily asserts that success must be sought in a defensive stance rather than through offensive maneuvers. First, allow the adversary to advance, and then launch a counteroffensive. This is a valuable lesson that the French people learned from the First World War and believed they could effectively apply in the Second World War as well.
So the Wehrmacht can focus on the Eastern Front's field movements. Both the Army Group North, led by General Fedor von Bock, and Army Group South under General Gerd von Rundstedt succeed quickly. Large territorial gains. Tactics play a crucial role in this.
Of all the armies in the Second World War, the Wehrmacht excels, especially in the early phases, at conducting combined arms battles, which involve coordinated efforts. Various troop types or branches like artillery, infantry, and tanks work together in a coordinated manner, ensuring efficiency, so that they interlock like gears in a machine, working seamlessly.
The German units leave a trail of devastation in their advance. A soldier of the 14th Army notes in his diary on the 3rd of September, The advance routes of the divisions are clearly visible to us. We drive over the front in endless columns, passing burning houses. Dead Polish civilians lie in bizarre positions in the fields next to the road, spies and rear gunners. I notice that everyone is watching, but few turn a blind eye. War, everyone thinks. The line between civilians and partisans is unclear for many inexperienced German soldiers.
Very quickly in the campaign against Poland, German attacks and crimes do occur. In the Wehrmacht, it is paramount that they are still very inexperienced in war, nervous, and feel attacked from all sides. The German troops overreact very quickly, setting entire villages on fire and executing hostages.
The German crimes against the Polish civilians, driven by ideology, start very early.
From the beginning, it is a war of annihilation, a war aimed at total decimation. Directed at the Polish population, Einsatzgruppen operate in the Wehrmacht's rear areas, and the result is the murder of at least 60,000 civilians, Polish politicians, but also clergy and academics, especially, of whom many were already of Jewish faith.
At the war's start, about 10% of the people are of Polish Jewish faith. The Jewish population swiftly falls victim to extreme violence. Nazi propaganda strives to keep on fueling the enemy image built up over many years. In propaganda films and weekly shows, Jewish people are specifically targeted.
Dieses ostjüdische Untermenschentum hat seit jeher Westeuropa das internationale Verbrechergesindel geliefert. Von hier aus wurden die Demokratien mit Taschendieben, Zuhältern, Rauschgift- und Mädchenhändlern, internationalen Bankschiebern und Hetzjournalisten versorgt.
While the 3,000 German soldiers of the first 5 groups behind the front are killing and murdering, the German advance makes its way forward. On September 6th, the 10th Army succeeds in a deep break into the Polish defensive front lines. The German Wehrmacht captures many cities in southern regions of Poland. The army benefits from a novel type of aerial support from the air.
Previously, looking back at World War I, the Air Force mainly conducted reconnaissance flights. However, the use, called tactical deployment of the Air Force to support ground troops, is something very special, which distinguishes the Wehrmacht in the early war years.
During the attack on Poland, the Wehrmacht establishes 2 air fleets with over 1,100 aircraft. The German dive bombers, known as Stukas, of the Junkers 87 type, are particularly feared and dreaded. In their dive, they emit a demoralizing and terrifying howl unique to them.
Zurück im Einsatzhafen sind unsere Stukas einige 100 Kilo leichter. Aber das verlorene Gewicht wird wieder ausgeglichen. Ran mit einer neuen Bombe!
The dive bombers can carry up to 1,800 kilograms of bomb load. Both soldiers and civilians fear the deadly threat from the air equally. On the so-called home front, the military successes of the war's first days are noted. Newspapers like the Offenburger Tageblatt report in special editions about the front's progress. However, no one can expect a truthful report here. The National Socialists have controlled the press for years. Despite censorship, the shadows of war quickly come to light. Trains bring the numerous wounded back home from the front. Lacerations and hospitalizations for soldiers are seen everywhere in the Reich, just like in this school in Hessian-Korbach. An amateur filmmaker records how the clinic quickly fills up with the wounded people. The balance at the end of the fall flight in Poland is over 10,000 dead German soldiers. On the Polish side, more than 10 times as many members of the army lose their lives. Such images are also part of the everyday life in many different places. 21 years after the end of the First World War, the Germans are burying their fallen soldiers once again.
At the beginning of the war, when fallen soldiers are still truly sent back home, the regime stages these funerals as grand ceremonies for the fallen heroes of the nation, clearly of National Socialism ideology. The entire family of the fallen soldier is highlighted once more to emphasize that even if something terrible happens, which is naturally tragic, the person has sacrificed their life for the regime, and the regime will ensure that the relatives are not forgotten.
The River Dzura near Kutno in central Poland. Unnoticed by German reconnaissance, parts of the Polish army, Pomorze and Poznani, have united together. Together they face the advancing German forces. The 8th Army of the Wehrmacht under General Błaszkiewicz faces temporary pressure from the enemy's offensive. With the help of parts of the 4th and 10th Armies, it is possible to encircle the Polish forces. On September 19th, the battle is decided. Around 170,000 Polish soldiers go into German war captivity, facing an uncertain future. Two days before the end of the decisive battle at Kutno, the Polish forces endure another heavy blow. The Red Army advances from the east with 2 army groups into the country.
With the Red Army's attack on East Poland on September 17th, it is essentially game over for Poland. A two-front war is impossible for Poland to win. But it might have been conceivable to prolong the war if they fought only one front. That is already difficult enough. But with September 17th, it essentially means they have no chance.
In the additional protocol of the Hitler-Stalin Pact, the Third Reich and the Soviet Union divided Poland among themselves. The Bug River acts as a line of demarcation. Just a few days after the Red Army's advance, the attackers convene at Brest-Litovsk and joyously celebrate their success with a joint military parade. In less than 2 years' time, the Wehrmacht soldiers and the Red Army find themselves meeting once again. But in June of 1941, they meet as enemies after Germany's attack on the Soviet Union. The war in Poland is decided, but it is not yet over. On September 25th, German Air Force attacks the encircled Polish capital. In the devastating air raids, more than 20,000 people lose their lives. After 2 days, Warsaw surrenders. Millions of people lose their homes due to the German Wehrmacht's campaign of destruction. The Polish state vanishes from the map.
The primary goal of the Germans is to reclaim the eastern territories they had to cede in the Treaty of Versailles. As quickly as possible, these newly or reacquired eastern territories are to be reintegrated into the Reich. Then the bulk of Polish territory is organized as the so-called general government. With a special status, it is initially intended as a deportation area for all unwanted people.
The Nazis establish ghettos where people of Jewish faith are crammed together and exploited. For many, this is the first stage of their suffering journey to death. Meanwhile, the German Wehrmacht rearms. In April 1940, under the code name Operation Weserübung, they advance into Norway and Denmark. A month later, German troops invade the Netherlands, Belgium, and Luxembourg. Then follows the invasion of France. The war expands. Hitler's soldiers occupy ever larger parts of Europe in the so-called Western Campaign, spreading terror.
Der deutsche Vormarsch kennt keinen Aufenthalt.
At home, the cult of personality around Hitler remains strong, even as the war already shows its brutal and harsh face. The fanatical adoration for the dictator blinds many to criminal warfare and military megalomania. After the Soviet Union in 1941, the USA also becomes a war opponent with Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor. Adolf Hitler and his accomplices have ignited a global conflagration.